The unusual neighbor. James had lived on Orion Station 47 for almost 2 years. It was a massive space station floating between human and alien territories. The place was home to many species, some friendly, some not. But as long as everyone followed the station's rules, things stayed peaceful. James worked as an engineer, fixing broken equipment and maintaining power systems. His job wasn't exciting, but it paid well, and he enjoyed the mix of cultures on the station. The only thing he didn't expect was having an alien as a next-door neighbor. Her name was Zilith, and she was Acceleran, a tall, humanoid species with glowing blue skin, sharp claws, and strange black eyes that shimmered like liquid metal. Celerans were known for being quiet and reserved, and Zilith was no different. She never spoke much, never caused trouble, and barely even acknowledged James' presence. That was, until one night, everything changed. The first sign. James had just finished a long shift at work. His hands were covered in grease, and he could still hear the loud hum of the power generators in his head. As he walked to his apartment, he stretched his arms, ready to collapse onto his bed. But then, he noticed something strange. Zilith's apartment was completely dark. That wasn't unusual. She often kept the lights off. But tonight, the air outside her door felt different. There was a strange smell, like a mix of burned metal and wildflowers. As James stepped closer, he heard something, a low humming sound coming from inside. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded alive. He hesitated. Probably just some weird alien thing, he muttered to himself. He had seen enough unusual customs in space. Maybe this was just one of them. Ignoring it, he unlocked his door and stepped inside. That was his first mistake. The midnight visitor. James barely had time to shower and get into bed before he felt something watching him. He sat up, heart pounding. His apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the station's ventilation. But that feeling, that deep, unsettling feeling, wouldn't go away. Slowly, he turned his head toward the window. And there she was, Zilith, standing outside his window. Her black, shimmering eyes stared straight at him. Her sharp fingers rested lightly on the glass. The pale blue light from the station's glow made her skin almost seem to pulse. James froze. What the hell? Before he could finish, she was gone, vanished into the shadows. James' chest tightened. His heart slammed against his ribs. He wasn't imagining that, was he? No. He saw her. He was sure of it. But why was she watching him? The unsettling change. The next morning, James felt exhausted. He hadn't slept well. His brain kept replaying that moment. Those black, glowing eyes staring at him through the glass. Maybe she needed something. Maybe she was in trouble. Deciding to confront her, he stepped out of his apartment and knocked on her door. No answer. He knocked again. Hey, Zilith, you all right? Still nothing. James frowned. He wasn't close to her, but she had never ignored him before. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a small package lying at his doorstep. It was wrapped in a thin, silky material, shimmering in different colors under the station's lights. James picked it up carefully. Inside, he found a glowing stone, smooth and warm to the touch, along with a piece of silver cloth embroidered with symbols he didn't recognize. What was this? A gift. A message. His fingers tightened around the stone. Something was very, very wrong. The warning. Later that day, James went to work, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to Zilith's strange behavior. When he told his coworker, Doran, a human who had been on the station much longer, his friend paled. You said she was watching you, Doran asked. James nodded. Yeah, last night. And she left me this weird glowing stone. Doran's face darkened. He looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. James, Zellerans don't give gifts without reason. James frowned. What do you mean? Doran exhaled, rubbing his face. They have strict customs. The glowing stone. That's called a soul mark. It means she's choosing you. James blinked. Choosing me? For what? Doran hesitated before answering. For mating season. James' stomach dropped. Mating season? What the hell was Doran talking about? Before he could ask more, his communicator buzzed. A message from Zilith. 2 words. Choose wisely, human. James felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was happening, he was in serious trouble. Strange behavior. James couldn't focus at work. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Zilith's glowing eyes staring at him through his window. Her cryptic message, choose wisely, human, echoed in his mind. Koren's warning about Celeran customs didn't help either. Mating season. That had to be a joke, right? But what if it wasn't? By the time his shift ended, James was exhausted. He had spent the whole day working on a faulty oxygen recycler in one of the lower decks. His arms ached, his head pounded, and he wanted nothing more than to collapse in bed. But as soon as he stepped into the residential sector, he knew something was wrong. The hallways were too quiet. Orion Station was always busy. Humans, aliens, and maintenance bots moved in and out of their living spaces at all hours. But tonight, there was an unsettling emptiness. James' apartment was at the far end of the corridor. As he walked toward it, he noticed shadows moving near Zilith's door. He froze. 2 tall Celerans stood outside her apartment, their skin darker than hers, their black eyes scanning the hallway like predators. James didn't move. He wasn't stupid. He had seen Celerans fight before. They were fast, ruthless, and dangerously strong. One of them turned his head slightly, sniffing the air. His claws twitched. James' breath hitched. Then, without a word, the 2 aliens turned and disappeared into the shadows. James didn't relax. If they were there for Zilith, what did that mean for him? And why did he feel like he was being hunted? Unwanted gifts. James stepped inside his apartment and locked the door behind him. His instincts told him to stay alert. Something was happening, and he had a feeling he was at the center of it. Then he saw it. Lying on his table was another gift. The first one, the glowing stone, was still in his pocket. But this was different. A piece of Celeran armor, broken at the edges, covered in dried blue blood. James' stomach turned. Had Zilith fought someone? He didn't know much about Celerans, but he knew enough to understand this wasn't a random act. They didn't give things without reason. Before he could process it, his communicator buzzed. A new message. From Zilith. Do not open your door tonight. James' hands clenched around the device. His apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Outside, the hallway lights flickered. Something was coming. The hunt begins. James didn't sleep. How could he? His mind was racing with questions. Why had those Stellorans been near Zilith's door? Why did she leave him a bloody piece of armor? And most importantly, what the hell was happening on this station? The answer came sooner than he wanted. At exactly midnight, James heard it. A low, guttural growl outside his door. His whole body went still. Then, a sharp scratch against the metal. James held his breath. Don't move. Another scratch. This time, deeper. James grabbed the only weapon he had, a heavy wrench. He had no idea if it would help, but he felt better holding something solid. Then, a whisper. Not in human language. Not in standard Galactic. Celeran. James didn't understand the words, but he felt them. A threat. A warning. A promise. Then, silence. After several long minutes, James exhaled and stepped toward the door. He pressed his ear against the metal. Nothing. Had they left? Slowly, he unlocked the panel and opened the door just an inch. His blood ran cold. Right outside, smeared across his door, was a single claw mark. And beneath it, Celeran writing. James didn't need a translator to understand what it meant. You have been chosen. His hands trembled. What did that mean? Zilith's explanation. The next morning, James didn't go to work. He couldn't. Instead, he did something reckless, something stupid. He knocked on Zilith's door. A few seconds passed before it slid open. And there she was. For the first time since he had met her, she didn't look calm. Her usually smooth, glowing skin looked darker, almost bruised. Her breathing was heavy. Her fingers twitched at her sides, and her black eyes burned with something James didn't understand. Inside. Now. Her voice was sharp. No hesitation. No room for argument. James stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Before he could speak, Zilith moved closer. Too close. I warned you, she said, her voice low, controlled. You should not have opened the door. James' heart pounded. What's going on? Who were those Accelerants last night? Zilith's fingers curled into a fist. Rivals. James frowned. Rivals for what? She exhaled slowly. For you. James felt his stomach twist. Me? Why? Zilith hesitated for just a second. Then, her black eyes locked onto his. Because I chose you. The room suddenly felt smaller. James tried to speak, but nothing came out. Zilith took a step back. I left you gifts. You accepted them. James' mind raced. I didn't. She cut him off. In Accelerant culture, that means you accept the bond. James' breath hitched. Bond. She nodded. Mating bond. James' brain short-circuited. Wait. Zilith crossed her arms. You accepted. Now others will challenge me for you. James blinked rapidly. That's insane. I didn't agree to anything. Zilith tilted her head. You took my gift. That is agreement. James felt dizzy. His whole life, he had seen weird alien customs. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Before he could argue, Zilith's expression darkened. I will protect you, she said. But you must decide soon. James swallowed hard. Decide what? She leaned closer. Whether you belong to me or to them. James had no idea what terrified him more. The idea of being claimed by an alien warrior, or the fact that someone else was already trying to take him. The first attack. James sat frozen in Zilith's apartment, his mind struggling to process her words. You must decide soon whether you belong to me or to them. The weight of the statement settled in his chest. This wasn't some weird cultural misunderstanding. This was a fight for survival. Zilith's black eyes remained locked onto him, her expression unreadable. They will not stop. The others. They see you as an unclaimed prize. James exhaled sharply. Prize? I'm not a damn trophy. Her sharp fingers curled. To them, you are. James rubbed his temples. All right, let's say I believe this. How does this bond work? You leave gifts, I pick them up, and suddenly I'm engaged to an alien. Zilith's gaze didn't waver. You do not understand, human. Tellurians do not date as you do. A bond is formed through rituals, gifts, and protection. If one is claimed, others may challenge for them. This is how it has always been. James pinched the bridge of his nose. And what happens if someone else wins? Zilith's expression darkened. They take you. James felt a cold chill creep up his spine. Take me. As in. She nodded. As their mate. Their property. His stomach twisted. This wasn't just some alien romance game. This was life and death. And he was caught in the middle of it. The first warning. James knew one thing for sure. He couldn't go back to his apartment. Not with unknown Accelerants hunting him. Zilith gave him a place to rest, but sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made his heart pound. By the time he dozed off, it felt like only minutes before he was shaken awake. James. His eyes snapped open. Zilith stood over him, her skin glowing faintly under the dim lights. Her expression was tense. "They're here." James sat up instantly. "Who?" Zilith moved to the door, pressing a hand against the metal. Her black eyes narrowed. "The first challenger." A shiver ran down James' spine. Then a loud metallic crash shook the walls. Something, or someone, had just slammed into the door. James' heart pounded. "You locked it, right?" Zilith didn't answer. Instead, she reached for something behind her. A sleek, curved Celeran blade. She turned to James. "Stay behind me." James clenched his fists. He wasn't a fighter, but he hated the idea of just watching while Zilith risked herself. The next impact was stronger. The door bent inward slightly. Zilith's claws flexed. "They will not stop." James' pulse raced. "Then what do we do?" She tilted her head, considering something. "We fight." Before he could argue, the door exploded inward. The challenger. Smoke and sparks filled the air as the heavy door was ripped apart. A towering Celeran male stepped into the room, his dark blue skin shimmering with battle marks. His eyes, pitch black, like Zilith's, fixed on James. James took a step back. This guy was huge. The alien's voice was low and rumbling. "The human is unclaimed. I challenge for him." Zilith stepped forward, her stance predatory. "He is already mine." The male snarled. "He has not accepted the bond." James swallowed. What did that mean? Zilith didn't flinch. "He stays with me." The male bared his teeth in a terrifying Celeran war grin. "Then prove you can keep him." James barely had time to react before the fight began. The attacker moved first, fast, brutal, and deadly. His claws slashed through the air toward Zilith's chest. She dodged effortlessly, her own blade striking back in a flash of silver. James could barely follow their movements. Zilith twisted and aimed for his throat, but the male blocked with his forearm, sending a shockwave through the room. The walls shook from the impact. James stumbled back, heart pounding. This wasn't a normal fight. This was a battle for dominance. And Zilith was fighting for him, the cost of losing. The challenger struck hard, forcing Zilith back. James gritted his teeth. "Can I help?" Zilith didn't look at him. "If you interfere, you become his." James' blood turned cold. She had to win, or James' fate was sealed. Zilith lunged, feinting left, but at the last second, the male anticipated her move. His clawed hand lashed out, slashing across her side. James' breath caught. Blood, blue and shimmering, spilled onto the floor. Zilith staggered. The male grinned. "You are weak." James clenched his fists. No, 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 no. Zilith wasn't weak. She wasn't beaten yet. With a fierce growl, she used her injury as a distraction, spinning low and sweeping the challenger's legs out from under him. He crashed to the floor. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed the *** nearest object, a heavy metal panel from the broken door, ***, and slammed it into the Celeran's skull. The alien roared in pain. Zilith took the chance. Her blade flashed. A second later, the fight was over. The male groaned, clutching his injured shoulder, his body trembling. Defeated. Zilith towered over him, her breathing ragged. "You lost," she hissed. "Leave. Now." The male let out a low growl but obeyed. He disappeared into the corridor, dragging himself away. James let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. His entire body shook. Zilith turned to him, wounded but victorious. "You should not have interfered." James swallowed. "You were hurt." She stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. Foolish human. Despite her words, there was something new in her expression. Something like pride. James wasn't sure what that meant. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The challenge begins. James sat in the dimly lit apartment, his breath still uneven from the fight, The scent of scorched metal, blood, and something else, something primal, lingered in the air. Zilith stood near the broken door, her black eyes locked onto him. Despite her wounds, she held herself with the confidence of a warrior who had fought and won. But James couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "You should not have interfered," she said again, her voice low but firm. James exhaled sharply. "I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. That guy was trying to claim you," she finished, stepping closer. "Yes, and if he had succeeded, you would have belonged to him." James clenched his fists. "You keep saying that like I don't have a choice in this." Zilith tilted her head. "You do. But the station's rules do not apply to Accelerant customs. And now, the others will see you as a contested mate." James' stomach twisted. "Meaning?" Zilith's glowing blue skin shimmered under the dim light. "Meaning the first challenge has been issued. Others will follow. And they will not all fight by the rules." A chill ran down James' spine. "Great. So what now?" Zilith exhaled, her sharp claws flexing slightly. "Now, we prepare. The real challenge is coming soon." James could only stare at her. The real challenge. What the hell had he gotten himself into? The Accelerant rituals begin. James didn't sleep that night. How could he? He had just fought, or rather assisted in a fight, for his own freedom. But Zilith remained calm, focused, like she had been expecting this. By morning, the station's atmosphere had changed. James noticed it immediately when he stepped out of Zilith's apartment. The way the other Accelerants stared at him was different. Before, they ignored him. Now, their black, liquid-like eyes followed his every movement. Some looked curious. Others looked hostile. And then there were the ones who seemed hungry. James felt a tight knot in his stomach. Doran, his coworker, rushed toward him the moment he entered the maintenance deck. "Are you insane?" Doran whispered sharply, pulling him aside. "I heard what happened. You got yourself caught up in Accelerant bond war." James frowned. "A what?" Doran groaned. "It's an ancient Accelerant tradition. When a mate is contested, the suitors must prove their dominance through combat. And it doesn't end until only one is left." James' blood turned ice cold. "You mean?" "Yes," Doran said grimly. "This won't stop until either Zilith claims you completely, or one of the others defeats her and takes you." James inhaled sharply. "How do I stop this?" Doran gave him a look. "You don't. You're already in it." James' hands clenched. He had been in bad situations before, but never like this. And the worst part, he had a feeling Zilith wasn't telling him everything. The first formal challenge. That evening, Zilith led James to the combat arena. It wasn't a large public space like the human gyms or fighting pits on the station. This was Accelerant-only area, deep within the station's lower levels. Dim blue lights pulsed along the walls. The scent of burning minerals and raw energy filled the air. At the center of the chamber, waiting for them, was another Accelerant warrior. This one was different from the last challenger. He was bigger, his skin was a darker shade of blue, and his arms bore the scars of previous battles. His eyes locked onto Zilith first. Then, slowly, they drifted toward James. "Human," the warrior rumbled. His voice was deep, vibrating through the air like distant thunder. James swallowed. "But yeah." The warrior smirked. "You are smaller than I expected." James felt his pride sting. "Yeah, well, I wasn't exactly planning on being part of an alien gladiator tournament." The warrior's expression darkened. "It is no tournament. It is survival." Zilith stepped between them. "State your challenge, Vorak." The male's sharp fangs glinted in the low light. "I challenge for the human's bond. If I win, he is mine." James tensed. Here we go again. Zilith didn't hesitate. "Then prepare to lose." Vorak let out a low guttural laugh. "We shall see." The fight for bonding rights. The moment the duel began, James realized something. This fight was different. The first challenger had been a brute, strong, aggressive, but reckless. Vorak, he was precise. Every attack was calculated. Every move had a purpose. And Xylith was struggling. James had never seen her hesitate before. But now, she was slower, more defensive. And then, it hit him. She was still wounded from the last fight. She wasn't at full strength. And Vorak knew it. James' pulse skyrocketed. If Xylith lost. No. James refused to accept that. She had fought for him. Now it was his turn. James interferes. Again, James moved before he could think. Vorak lunged, his claws aimed for Xylith's throat. James grabbed the nearest weapon-like object, a loose metal staff from the arena's edge, and swung it hard at Vorak's back. The impact staggered the Accelerant warrior. Xylith didn't waste the opportunity. With a fierce battle cry, she spun low and slashed Vorak's leg. He let out a snarl of pain, stumbling backward. James quickly backed up, realizing he might have just broken another Accelerant rule. Vorak's furious black eyes snapped toward him. "You dare interfere?" James raised his makeshift weapon. "She's fighting injured. That's not a fair fight." Xylith let out a sharp breath. "James." Vorak suddenly laughed. "You are bold, human," he mused. "Foolish, but bold." Then, to James' surprise, he stepped back and lowered his claws. "The fight is over," he declared. James blinked. "Wait. What?" Vorak smirked. "The human fights alongside you. That means he has already made his choice." James' stomach dropped. Xylith's expression hardened. "That is not how it works, Vorak." The warrior chuckled. "Maybe not by your standards, but the others will see it this way. He has chosen you." He turned away, but his parting words sent a chill through James' bones. Now the real fight begins. Fight for survival. James sat in Xylith's apartment, staring at his hands. They were still shaking. Adrenaline still rushed through his veins. The duel against Vorak had ended in a way no one expected. James had interfered again. And somehow, that meant he had chosen Xylith. Now, the real consequences were about to begin. Across the room, Xylith sat on the floor, sharpening her blade. Her blue skin was still marked with the wounds from the fight. She hadn't spoken much since they returned. James couldn't take the silence anymore. "So, what happens now?" Xylith didn't look up. "The others will not accept this." James frowned. "The others?" She finally met his gaze. "There are more challengers, James. Vorak was strong, but he was only testing us. The real threats are still coming." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. "How many?" Xylith exhaled. "I do not know. But the moment you stood against Vorak, you proved you were more than just a passive bondmate. They will see you as a warrior now." James swallowed hard. "I'm not a warrior." Xylith's black, liquid-like eyes studied him. "Then you must become one." James' stomach turned. He was just an engineer, a guy who fixed broken reactors, not some kind of space gladiator. But now, it seemed he had no choice. "The training begins." Xylith didn't waste time. As soon as James agreed to train, she led him to an underground combat chamber deep inside Orion Station. The walls were lined with old weapons, some human, some alien. James picked up a Accelerant battle staff. The weapon was lightweight but durable, humming softly in his grip. Xylith circled him. "Show me how you fight." James sighed. "I told you I don't." Before he could finish, she lunged at him. James barely dodged as her clawed hand slashed the air where his chest had been. His heart raced. Xylith didn't stop. She moved fast, too fast. Every attack forced James to step back. His brain screamed at him to swing the staff. Block, do something. He barely managed to parry her next strike. The impact shook his arms. Xylith smirked. Pathetic. James gritted his teeth. Hey, cut me some slack. I've never done this before. She rolled her shoulders. Then you must learn quickly. She struck again, faster this time. James forced himself to react. Move, counter, dodge. For the first time, he felt the rhythm of the fight. And when he finally landed a hit against Zilith's arm, her smirk widened. Better, she admitted. James exhaled, his muscles burning. So, what exactly am I training for? Zilith's expression darkened. For survival. The deadliest challenger arrives. That night, James barely had time to rest before a station-wide alert blared through the halls. A deep voice echoed over the comms. Attention. A high-priority Accelerant duel has been registered. Challenger, Commander Koreth. Opponent, Zilith of Clan Varric. Time, 1 hour. Location, the arena. James turned to Zilith, his chest tightening. Who the hell is Koreth? Her expression was unreadable. The strongest warrior of my kind. James' heart stopped. You mean? She nodded. He has never lost a duel. If I fail, he will take you. James felt a rush of cold fear. This was worse than Vorak. This wasn't just another warrior trying to prove himself. This was a champion. And if Zilith lost, James' fate was sealed. The arena of death. The moment James stepped into the Accelerant battle arena, he knew this was different from before. The chamber was packed with dozens of Accelerants, all watching in silence. Some of them whispered in hushed tones. Others stared directly at James, assessing him. At the center of the arena stood Koreth. He was a mountain of muscle, nearly 7 feet tall, with deep violet-blue skin and long scars across his chest. His black eyes gleamed as he studied Zilith. Then his gaze shifted to James. So this is the human, Koreth rumbled. A fragile creature, unworthy of a warrior's protection. James clenched his jaw. He was getting real tired of being treated like a prize. Zilith stepped forward. He is my bondmate. If you want him, you fight me. Koreth grinned. Then let us begin. The duel of blood and honor. The moment the battle started, James knew something was wrong. Zilith was fast, but Koreth was faster. His first strike sent her flying backward. She barely caught herself before he lunged again, his claws tearing through the air. Zilith dodged, but just barely. James' stomach twisted. He had never seen her struggle like this. Koreth was a different kind of monster. For every hit Zilith landed, Koreth delivered 3 in return. And James realized the horrible truth. She wasn't going to win. Not in her current state. Not while still recovering from her last fight. Koreth moved in for the final blow. James acted on instinct. Ignoring the gasps of the watching Accelerants, he rushed into the arena. Zilith's black eyes widened in shock. James. No. But it was too late. James grabbed a fallen weapon, a plasma knife, and threw it with all his strength. The blade slashed across Koreth's arm, searing his skin. The warrior staggered back, snarling. The arena fell silent. Then, a slow, rumbling laugh. Koreth looked at the wound, then at James. You truly are a fool, human, he said. James stood his ground, even as fear clawed at his throat. Maybe, but I don't let people fight for me while I just watch. Koreth smirked. Then he did something unexpected. He dropped his stance. The duel is over, he announced. James blinked. Wait, what? Koreth turned to the audience. The human has proven himself. He is not just a bondmate. He is a warrior. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Koreth looked back at Zilith. Your claim is now undisputed. No one will challenge you again. James' breath caught. That was it. Zilith slowly exhaled, her gaze shifting to James. You risked everything, she murmured. James shrugged, wiping sweat from his forehead. I guess I made my choice. Koreth chuckled. Indeed. And for that, you have earned my respect. He turned to leave, but before he disappeared, He left James with a final warning. Be careful, human. You may have won your freedom, but you have also gained something far more dangerous. James frowned. And what's that? Korath's black eyes gleamed. A reputation. The aftermath. James felt like he had just walked out of a nightmare. The arena was silent. The watching Zellerans, who had been so eager to see a brutal fight, now looked at him differently. Before, they had seen a prize, a weak human caught in their customs. But now, they saw a warrior. Korath had called off the duel after James' interference, an unthinkable act. And yet, none of the other Xelorans protested. James had done something impossible. He had changed the rules. Now, standing beside Zilith, his heart still pounding, he tried to process what had just happened. Zilith, still catching her breath, looked at him with an unreadable expression. Her black, liquid-like eyes held something strange, a mix of admiration, frustration, and something else. You should not have done that, she said, voice low. James exhaled sharply. Yeah, well, I don't exactly follow space gladiator rules. Zilith narrowed her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she turned to the crowd and raised her head. The duel is over. He is mine. James' stomach twisted at those words, not because he disliked them, but because something about them felt real. Korath gave one last smirk before stepping back into the shadows. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispering to one another in hushed Xeloran tones. And just like that, the fight was over. Or so James thought. The quiet before the storm. Back in Zilith's quarters, James sat on the edge of a metallic chair, rubbing his temples. His body ached from the tension, and his mind raced with unanswered questions. Zilith stood nearby, wrapping a bandage around her arm where Korath had slashed her. The glowing blue blood had already stopped flowing, but she moved with slight stiffness. James frowned. Are you okay? Zilith barely glanced at him. I have had worse. James let out a short laugh. That doesn't make me feel any better. She finally turned, studying him. You should feel relief. The challenges are over. No one will try to take you now. James leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, great. Now I'm officially claimed by an alien warrior. Silence stretched between them. Then Zilith spoke, softer than before. You do not have to stay. James looked at her, surprised. You fought for me, she continued, watching him carefully. But I will not hold you against your will. If you wish to leave, you may. James stared at her, trying to read between the lines. Xelorans weren't exactly known for emotional displays, but something about her stance, her words, they felt heavy, like she was offering him something she didn't want to give. A choice. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't even know what I want anymore. Zilith hesitated. Then, as if choosing her words carefully, she said, Then stay. At least until you do. James looked at her, this fierce warrior who had fought, bled, and nearly died for him. And for the first time since this mess started, he didn't feel like running. The unexpected consequences. The next morning, James' entire life changed. He woke up to a message from the station's High Council. When he opened it, his blood went cold. Human James Carter, you are hereby summoned to an urgent diplomatic meeting regarding your recent actions. Report to the upper deck at 800 hours. James groaned. What now? Zilith, already awake and sharpening her blade, glanced at him. What is it? James rubbed his face. The High Council wants to see me. She paused. That is unusual. James threw up his hands. Tell me about it. I'm an engineer. Why the hell does the station's government want to talk to me? Zilith was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I will go with you. James hesitated, then nodded. Whatever was coming, he had a feeling he'd need her. The council's decision, the upper deck of Orion Station 47, was a place James had never been before. It was reserved for high-ranking officials, diplomats, and those involved in interspecies negotiations. When he stepped inside the meeting chamber, every eye turned to him. Humans, Zellerans, even a few reptilian Tivaxans. At the center of the long table sat Administrator Relic, the human leader of the station. Beside him was Overseer Xoreth, a high-ranking Zelleran representative. James swallowed hard. This was serious. Administrator Relic leaned forward. "James Carter, you have caused quite a disturbance." James forced a nervous laugh. "Yeah, sorry about that. Wasn't exactly in my plans." Overseer Xoreth's black eyes studied him carefully. "You changed the rules of our ancient bonding rituals. You fought for your own fate. You stood against our warriors." James shifted in his seat. "I was just trying to not get kidnapped." Xoreth's lips twitched slightly, almost like a smile. "And yet now you are a name spoken among my kind, not as a human, but as a warrior." James blinked. Thanks." The Overseer's expression darkened. "Your actions have set a precedent. Zellorans do not allow outsiders to challenge our customs, but you have already done so." James sat up straighter. "Wait, are you saying?" Administrator Relic sighed. "You've caught their attention, James. More than that, you've gained their respect." James frowned. "So, what does that mean?" Xoreth exchanged a look with Relic before answering. "It means you have been offered a position." James froze. "A position? As what?" Xoreth's black eyes gleamed. "As the first human Zelleran diplomatic representative." James' mind short-circuited. He had just spent the last week fighting off warriors, getting nearly kidnapped, and dodging interspecies marriages. Now, they wanted to make him a diplomat. James turned to Zillith, expecting her to look just as shocked. Instead, she smirked, like she already knew this would happen. James groaned, dropping his head onto the table. "Why do I feel like this is going to be even more dangerous than the fights?" The council members chuckled. And just like that, James Carter's life in space was about to get even more complicated. The unexpected consequence. James Carter had faced a lot of challenges since coming to Orion Station 47. Getting stuck in an alien bonding war. Check. Accidentally becoming the first human to interfere in a Zelleran duel. Check. Winning the respect of a species known for their warrior culture. Check. Now he was sitting in a high-level diplomatic meeting with some of the most powerful people on the station, and he had no idea what to do. Across the table, Overseer Xoreth, the Zelleran leader, watched him with calculating black eyes. "You have changed the course of our traditions, human." James shifted in his seat. "I really wasn't trying to." Xoreth smirked slightly. "And yet you did. You refused to remain a passive prize. You fought. You stood beside a Zelleran warrior, as an equal." James opened his mouth, then closed it. That wasn't exactly how he saw it, but he wasn't going to argue. Administrator Relic, the human leader of the station, leaned forward. "James, the situation is delicate. The Zellerans are offering you something rare. An opportunity." James frowned. "Yeah, about that. Why?" Xoreth interlaced his clawed fingers. "Because you are the first outsider to stand within our customs and earn the right to remain." James raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying I'm an exception?" Xoreth nodded. "For now. But exceptions become precedents." James exhaled slowly. He could feel the weight of what they were asking. They weren't just offering him a fancy title. They were offering him a responsibility. And once he stepped into that role, there was no going back. Zillith's warning. Later, as James and Zillith walked back toward the lower levels of the station, his mind was still racing. "They want me to be a diplomat," he muttered. "Me? I don't know the first thing about negotiations." Zillith glanced at him. "You have already negotiated with warriors trying to claim you. That is more than most diplomats can say." James let out a short laugh. "Yeah, But I did that by accident. Zilith's expression softened slightly. And yet, it worked. James shook his head. I don't know. This feels big. Zilith stopped walking, turning to face him. It is, and that is why you must decide carefully. James frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated for just a moment before speaking. Becoming a representative will give you influence, but it will also give you enemies. James felt a chill. You think someone's going to come after me? Zilith's black eyes darkened. There are those who will not accept a human in this role, and others who will seek to use you as a political pawn. James rubbed his forehead. Great. So instead of warriors trying to fight over me, now I'll have politicians doing it. Zilith smirked slightly. Perhaps. James sighed, shaking his head. You know, when I first came to this station, I just wanted a quiet job. Fix some machines, get paid, and avoid trouble. Zilith tilted her head. You failed spectacularly. James laughed. Yeah, I did. Then he looked at her. What do you think I should do? Zilith studied him for a long moment. I think you have already made your choice. James exhaled. Maybe she was right. Maybe, despite everything, he wanted to see where this led. The ceremony. A few days later, the formal appointment ceremony was held in the station's upper decks. James stood in a strange Acceleran robe, deep blue with silver embroidery. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but apparently it was tradition. The hall was filled with station officials, alien diplomats, and Acceleran warriors, including Korath and Vorak, who now regarded James with something closer to respect. At the front of the room, Overseer Xoreth stood. James Carter, you have proven yourself in battle and in spirit. You have earned the right to stand among us. James swallowed hard as the Overseer stepped forward, placing a small metallic insignia in his palm. With this, you are recognized as the first human representative in Acceleran affairs. Your role is to bridge our worlds and ensure balance between them. James nodded, unsure whether to feel proud or terrified. Then the Overseer turned to Zilith. And you, Zilith of Clan Varric, have fought for his right to be here. Your bond is recognized. James' breath hitched. Wait, what? Zilith, to his absolute shock, showed no reaction, as if she already knew this was coming. James leaned toward her. What exactly does recognized bond mean? He whispered. Zilith smirked slightly. That you are mine. James choked on air. Excuse me. Xoreth raised an eyebrow. Is there a problem, human? James forced a smile. Nope. No problem at all. Laughter rippled through the gathered Accelerans, and James had the distinct feeling that his life was about to get even more complicated. Epilogue. The future of Orion Station 47. The next few weeks were interesting. James had his own office now. Well, more like a tiny workspace crammed between alien diplomats and human negotiators. His job? Acting as the bridge between humans and Accelerans, solving disputes, navigating interspecies conflicts. It was chaotic. It was unpredictable. And he kind of loved it. Even if half the station now referred to him as Zilith's human. One evening, as he walked through the marketplace, he heard someone call his name. He turned to see Doran, his old coworker, grinning. Well, look at you, Mr. Important. James chuckled. Don't remind me. One day, I'm fixing generators. The next, I'm some kind of alien ambassador. Doran smirked, and bonded to Acceleran warrior too. Didn't see that coming. James sighed. Yeah, neither did I. Then from behind, Zilith's calm voice spoke. He is not complaining. James jumped. Damn it, stop sneaking up on me like that. Doran laughed, and Zilith only smirked. James sighed. This was his life now. And honestly, it wasn't so bad. As long as nobody else tried to challenge for him again. But something told him, This was only the beginning.